Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Fantasy 420, where today we are going to be returning to the diamond and returning to the outfield with part two of our 2019 Fantasy Outfield preview. Once again, like all my previous baseball preview videos, we'll be using the Fantasy Pros aggregate rankings. Since I don't know which platform you will be drafting on, this is important to get a baseline so I can tell you around where the players are going to be drafted. And we left off at around Juan Soto, so I'm going to be picking up at Marcell Ozuna, who is on Fantasy Pros around rank number 55. He's receiving a slight discount off of last year's injury-plagued and semi-disappointing season. However, while it was a down season, it was still pretty good in comparison to, a normal outfielder. He still hit around 30 home runs, 90 RBIs, 90 runs, and this should obviously, in my opinion, rise as the team bought into Paul Goldschmidt to hit right in front of him at third. When you suddenly infuse one of the best hitters in the game into the lineup, and especially right in front of you, it provides you a lot of protection. So that, and I think the St. Louis Cardinals will contend for that division. And if he starts this year off healthier, another season under that lineup's belt, I think you should see a rise in those numbers, and he should maybe finish around a top 20 player. So I would buy into him there in the fifth round, maybe later if people soured on him. Next guy I'm going to go to is Tommy Pham. He's going to be drafted around player number 61. Kind of burned me last year, so it's kind of paining me to say this, but you got to be unbiased when it comes to fantasy and look at it a little bit with a blind eye towards last season, especially if you pick that player and he was down. So he started off last season hot, got injured, was promptly traded, and then he had a really good season last year. He also was traded to Tampa Bay. I sort of said that they are probably the worst hitting lineup in the league, so he is their de facto best player. He's probably going to hit first or second, see a ton of at bats, and they're going to be counting on him. He contributed Andrew Benintendi like numbers last year, and you're picking him in around 3 rounds later. So it's hard to argue for value with him. He could also go off like he did in 2017, and like I said, he exceeds his value by double. You have a top 25 player once again. I will say it is scary what he said about Tampa Bay's fans in the offseason, so they might go into sell mode with him if they do really poorly, but like I said, it's hard to argue with the upside and where he's being chosen. So moving on, I will next go into Mitch Haniger. He is going to be around number 70. He's had a breakout 2018 season, and he really did well all around 90 RBIs, 25 plus home runs, 90 runs, hits 300. Didn't hurt anybody in any real category. In many models, he finished as a top 30 player. So I think this is just a discount due to him not being doing that for very long, and this last season just being a breakout. But I don't really see why he would regress a lot, especially, and he should actually. They're going to expect more out of him. The Mariners lost maybe as much of their lineup as anyone, including the Diamondbacks, with Cano being traded, Segura being traded, no Mike Zunino, and no Nelson Cruz. They lost 4 of their hitters, so they're going to expect a ton out of him, and I expect him to play every day and maybe exceed last year, probably exceed last year. So once again, top 25 upside at pick 70 or so. He's only 28 years old, and I expect him to not take a step back, and I would definitely select him there and like push the button frantically. In a mold with Haniger, exactly like him, is Nick Castellanos. Once again, around 25 plus home runs, 90 runs, 90 RBIs. He's going to hit around 300. He Like Seattle, I expect Detroit to be bad. I expect Seattle to be better, even though they lost those players. But I expect Detroit to be the worst team in that division once again. But that's not necessarily a bad thing for Castellanos. He's going to be hitting third in the order. And if you're picking him at 74, there's just, like I said, a ton of upside. He could double that value, return in a great season, top 25, 30 value if he hits that power tick. He's a big body, and people have kind of expecting more power for a while. That's probably why, once again, he's being picked at 74. He did it for this season and last season, but before that, disappointed for a while. And I expect him to be just right there, and if not, vastly outproduce that value. So I would, once again, he's only 27 years old, and he's the cornerstone of that team. So I would frantically push the button and take him there. The next name, you have an inverse situation exactly from Haniger and Castellanos in the sense of Michael Conforto. He's being picked at around pick 90, and he had sky-high expectations for 2018 after he was a top prospect who was called up in 2017. And it was sort of like Ozuna, where he had good peripherals in the sense of RBIs, home runs, and RBIs, but it was less than 250 average, and how he did it. Like, he disappointed for a lot of stretches of the season. He was hurt, and the Mets did not do very well. But if you take into account the opposite of the Seattle Mariners offseason in the sense that they added Robinson Cano, Jed Lowry, Wilson Ramos to hit around him, and he's only 26. He's going to be hitting cleanup in that Mets lineup that I expect is going to be right there contending for the playoffs. If not, the management expects them to be contending into the playoffs. So I expect those numbers to uptick, and if that average upticks and all those numbers uptick as well, you could be looking at a 110, 35, 110, and 300 guy, and that would put him at first round value. So there's a lot of upside there. I would have no problem picking Conforto. I don't think you're going to see the disappointing stretches like you did last year, and I think that he's going to be a really good player. Moving on, I have three more names. Aaron Hicks. He is similar to Conforto in numbers wise. He hit around 30 home runs, 90 RBIs, and hit around 250. But there was a different air about his season in the sense that the Yankees did really well and they were World Series contenders. That being said, he is expected to be the Yankee leadoff hitter going into 2019, which is probably a dream scenario for anybody playing baseball at this point. You have more protection than any spot in the major league, so I definitely expect a walks and average uptick numbers, but he's still going to provide you a good amount of home runs, which will then include an RBI uptick and also run uptick. So I really think at 103 he's a pretty slam dunk pick there, and I would have no problem buying into him, especially with an average jump. Probably my favorite guy I'm buying into on this list is David Peralta. Fantasy Pros has him at around 116 ranked. Early on for Yahoo, he's around 97, which I think is a little bit more reasonable. But he had a really good year last year. He batted 75 runs, 30 home runs, 87 RBIs, and he hit 293. So that's about Haniger or Castellanos, so good enough for around top 50. I think he's being discounted because, like I said, Arizona is going to take a step back, and they lost Paul Goldschmidt and AJ Pollock and a few more names. But that being said, he's still going to have a huge role in that lineup, and I don't see how he doesn't vastly outproduce 116. The last name I'm going to go through is Stephen Piscotty for the Oakland A's. He's being Fantasy Pros ranked at around 142. He really killed me last year in the playoffs, so I'm a little bit bitter, but he should hit sixth in that lineup and be a cornerstone young player in the eyes of the Oakland A's. And his role should only grow, especially if Oakland gets off to a really slow start. They could sell and move on from this season if they perform behind a few of the teams like I expect them to. I expect them to finish around third or fourth in that division. And if they do, they might move on from Chris Davis, Matt Olson, and Matt Chapman, in which case he would only move up in the lineup and his numbers would only improve. I do expect him to grow as another season in the league, and he was a really good story last year. So I think the A's, like I said, will treat him as a cornerstone, and they will like him to be in their franchise going forward. That's going to do it for part 2 of Outfield in Fantasy Baseball 2019. Guys, I do want to talk about football and analyze 2018 in the NFL, so I'll finish up with a few more pitching videos, maybe a sleeper baseball video, and I appreciate you guys listening. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Have a good day.